Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm going to be reading Deuteronomy 5:1 through 15. Moses conveyed all Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and ordinances that I am addressing to you today. You shall learn them and observe them diligently. The Lord our God had made a covenant with us to Horeb. Not our ancestors did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are we all alive today. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain, out of the fire. At the time, I was standing between the Lord and you to declare the words of the Lord. For you were afraid because of the fire and didn't go up the mountain." And he said, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall not have no other God before me. You shall not make yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is heaven above, or that is earth beneath, or that is water under earth. You shall not blow down or worship for them, for I am the Lord of your God, and I am a jealous God, punishing children for their iniquity of their parents, to the third and fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of generations of those who love and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of my name, of the Lord of God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses my name. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you to. For 6 days you shall labor and do all the work, but on the seventh day it is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your male or female slaves, your ox or your donkey, or any of your livestock, the resident alien of your towns, so your male and female slaves may rest as well as you. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and our Lord your God brought you out of there in a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord of your God can command you to keep the Sabbath day. This is the word of life. Thanks be to God."
The now quite elderly prophet Moses, the one who led their parents and their grandparents from slavery in Egypt, speaks to the Israelites of the covenant God gave to them and their ancestors some 40 years ago. This is a new generation, children who faintly remember life before the Exodus or grew up hearing stories of that time ago. And though they certainly felt the impact of the generational trauma of their parents who came from slavery, for many of them, wilderness is all they've ever known. So as Moses invites this new generation in the book of Deuteronomy of Israelites to put themselves in the shoes of the generations before them, we too are invited to step into the story, even just for a moment. Moses proclaims, God didn't just make this covenant with those at Mount Horeb. This is for all of us alive today. Observe the Sabbath and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, any of you. You and your family and those who work with and for you, those who reside in your town, those who participate in your life. You shall keep the Sabbath. Remember that you were oppressed in Egypt, and the Lord your God has liberated you. And therefore, the Lord your God has asked you to keep the Sabbath day. Moses asks all of us alive today, to keep the Sabbath, as God asked God's people. And while many of us might tense up when we dive into the Ten Commandments, Moses is recalling a story of liberation, a story of abundance, even in the wilderness, a story of God's people restored. And so, if you're looking for permission to rest, it's here from God's mouth. But this story doesn't end with you or with me. Moses asks his listeners to consider their neighbor too. It's fascinating that 40 years ago in Exodus, when we hear this verse in Exodus, and now we're in Deuteronomy, in Exodus, he doesn't say, so that your male and female slaves may rest like you, like we find in verse 14. Like any good preacher or teacher, Moses is speaking to our particular audience. And in this generation's time, this audience has surely changed. In Exodus, it was clear that their identity was a slave in Egypt, and God, the Creator, liberates them and comes from the heavens to tell them to be like their Creator, to rest on the seventh day. But here, in this new generation, that was becoming a distant memory. No longer were they enslaved in Egypt, but now they were people about to enter the promised land. They were so close. A people who would now be in charge of other people, who would have the ability to exercise power over others. Whether or not the Israelites are self-aware of this identity change, Moses is. Powerless to powerful, Moses knows his audience, often better than they seem to know themselves. So he adds this piece about ensuring that the people around him may rest like you, invoking this memory of where they had become. Remember what God has done for you, and remember what you get to do now for others. Their eyes were so focused to getting on the promised land. Had they forgotten where they came from? Had they forgotten who God was speaking to you? How can it be in just a generation's time that the Israelites' relationship with labor and empire has shifted? No longer were they the enslaved people of Egypt. They had been liberated from oppression. But there were still those working with and for them without Sabbath and hadn't seemed to be able to live in this same liberation. How could that be? How could it be that even though their ancestors were enslaved in Egypt, that there were still those living among them that were not set free? How could that be? But Moses knows that when we don't practice Sabbath, we so easily become the empire God set us free from. No, he says, no. This is a story for all of us alive today. Keep the Sabbath, yourself, your neighbor, and those around you. This is not just a story for those long ago, but a story for all of us listening today. The world might tell us that rest is scarce. Rest is something for those who work hard enough to earn it, or rest is for the weak. No. God says rest is for all. And a God who is a God of multiplication asks us to help our neighbor keep rest. And in doing so, God's Sabbath becomes more abundant. The Israelites were not liberated to become oppressors. No, that was not God's plan for them. They were liberated to liberate others. We are liberated to liberate others. Because God's Sabbath rest tears down these systems of the world's hierarchy, saying, even those that the world deems unworthy of rest and wholeness, I expect you to help them rest. I expect you to help them keep my commandments, to embrace this Sabbath restoration. So what do you need to do to help them experience Sabbath abundance? Just like you. Do you remember a time in your life where you didn't get to experience God's Sabbath abundance? Maybe that's now. Or a time in your life where you prayed to get to where you are now. Or maybe in this moment you feel tired like the Israelites who have been journeying through the wilderness. And Sabbath is just not even a thought in your mind, let alone something you've considered for others. Wherever you find yourself this morning is okay. It is good. And Moses is here to remind you that God, the liberator, has brought you here, but isn't done with us yet. God has brought us here not to practice this Sabbath abundance alone, but to extend these graces to others, to invite your neighbor into this promised land, to push your community into rest in God, to rest in God together. So what work needs to be done? What resources does your neighbor need to help keep God's Sabbath? It's different, right? When we see Sabbath as a communal practice and not just an individual one. When we see the needs of others become our needs, because Sabbath is for all of us alive today. Come join me. Come see what it's like. Taste the sweetness of milk and honey. Feel what it feels like to know that you are enough, not because what you have achieved, but because God says so. And experience God's abundance when you tell others about this gift too. Sabbath rest isn't a resource we hoard, but a gift that we extend to all God's people. And we serve a God whose actions are bent towards restoration and who invites us to be co-creators of a more whole, restful, loving world. Not only is Moses reminding us that we ought to slow down, but this is also a call to action. Whether they are our family members, workers, foreigners in the land, we have the gift of extending this invitation to all, which sometimes means doing more work to ensure the rest and restoration of all people, not just ourselves. This is a story for all of us alive today. While our spiritual ancestors received this liberation, we too must keep our Sabbath for our neighbors. We hold each other up. And in doing all the good we can in any time we can, big and small, to keep this Sabbath rest for families, for our friends, for those sitting in the pew next to us, the foreigners in our land, we are reminded that Sabbath alone wasn't God's dream for humanity. It was to experience Sabbath abundance together as a community, here and now. And as we evaluate the barriers of our neighbors that our neighbors have to Sabbath, we must be ready to get to work. For the Israelites, there were real social and economic barriers that their neighbors faced between them and God's Sabbath. And though our context might look a little bit different than this passage, this call to interrogate those systems, to ask why is that true, even when those systems are systems that we benefit from, that call remains. What might you do to invite your neighbor into Sabbath rest, into Sabbath abundance, into Sabbath restoration? Will you share a meal, an hour of childcare, or will you remind someone at coffee hour today or through an email that their enoughness doesn't come through their productivity, but it comes from God? Will you begin to question these systems in your community that allow some to thrive while others in our very neighborhood don't get the gift of a day off because they are trying to put food on the table? Will you share your resources? Will you ask others to share their resources too? Will you model Sabbath even when it's unpopular, even when others around you want to work endlessly? What work needs to be done so others can experience rest on the seventh day too? I imagine more conversations between Moses and the Israelites after this message. This is hard work, Moses says, but God has called you into Sabbath restoration, and you get to invite people too. This restoration is for you and for you to share. The story is for all of us alive today. Keep the Sabbath and make sure others rest as well. To be a liberated people who exist to bring others into God's liberating work. I know it's been a long journey in the wilderness, but when you're ready, let's get to work. It's time for all of us to have Sabbath. May it be known. Amen.